Thank you for clicking on this video. Remember to like, share and subscribe to continued stories. Also remember to click the notification bell so you can be notified whenever a new content is uploaded. The shadowy world of human trafficking is a global scourge, casting a dark net over a multitude of countries. These nefarious activities are often fueled by a toxic brew of poverty, desperation, and the insatiable demand for cheap labor and exploitation. According to the Global Slavery Index and various reports from organizations like Amnesty International and the United Nations, several countries stand out for their alarmingly high rates of human trafficking. Let's dive into the grim statistics and unravel the narrative of the 20 most affected nations and the insidious corruption that enables this heinous crime. 1. Thailand. Thailand has one of the highest rates of human trafficking, primarily due to its large and unregulated sex industry. Many people from neighboring countries such as Myanmar, Laos, and Cambodia are lured into the country with promises of good jobs, only to be forced into sexual exploitation. The government has taken some steps to combat the issue, but corruption and the demand for cheap labor and sex services continue to fuel the problem. Several factors make Thailand a target for human traffickers. First, its geographical location makes it a crossroads for many nations in Southeast Asia, allowing traffickers easy access. Second, poverty and lack of education create an environment where people feel desperate for better opportunities. Many believe that leaving their rural homes for cities like Bangkok or tourist spots can lead to prosperity, but instead, they often find themselves trapped. In Thailand, certain groups are particularly at risk for trafficking. Migrant workers from neighboring countries like Myanmar, Cambodia, and Laos are often lured by the promise of good jobs. Once they arrive, they may find themselves in situations where they cannot escape. Additionally, children are at a high risk, especially those from impoverished backgrounds. 2. India. India is a hub for various forms of human trafficking, including sex trafficking, forced labor, and bonded labor. Women and children are often trafficked within the country for the purposes of forced marriage and commercial sexual exploitation. The country's large population and poverty contribute to the high number of vulnerable individuals falling prey to traffickers. Here, an estimated 14 million people are trapped in modern slavery, with the vast majority being women and children. They are lured from their impoverished homes with false promises of employment, better opportunities and higher wages only to be thrust into a living hell of forced labor, sexual exploitation, and bondage. The corruption is endemic. It often starts at the local level with officials turning a blind eye or even facilitating the trade for a cut of the profits, which then metastasizes throughout the system, allowing traffickers to operate. 3. China. China is a source, destination, and transit country for men, women, and children subjected to forced labor and sex trafficking. Internal trafficking is significant due to the one-child policy that led to a gender imbalance. Traffickers also exploit North Korean refugees and migrant workers from other countries. The Middle Kingdom's vast size and economic might unfortunately serve as fertile ground for human trafficking. With a thriving black market for organs and forced labor camps, particularly targeting the Uyghur minority, China's human trafficking problem is deeply entwined with state policies and societal norms. The corruption is institutionalized, with reports suggesting that even government officials are involved in the illicit trade of humans. 4. Nigeria. Nigeria is a source, transit, and destination country for human trafficking. Women and children are trafficked primarily to Europe and the Middle East for forced labor and sexual exploitation. The traffickers often use voodoo rituals to intimidate their victims into compliance. Nigeria is considered a hub for human trafficking in Africa, due to widespread poverty, political instability, and the presence of extremist groups such as Boko Haram. Many young women and girls in Nigeria are trafficked for sexual exploitation, both within the country and internationally. Corruption within the Nigerian government and law enforcement agencies also hinders efforts to combat human trafficking in the country. 5. Philippines. The Philippines has a high incidence of sex trafficking, with a significant number of victims being sent to other countries, particularly Japan, South Korea, and the Middle East. The country is also a source of forced labor and domestic servitude. The Philippines has seen several cases where local government officials have been implicated in human trafficking. Investigations have revealed that some officials facilitated the operation of brothels and engaged with traffickers to protect their activities in exchange for bribes. In recent years, a more stringent crackdown has led to some arrests, but the corruption endemic to local governance continues to shield many perpetrators. 6. Mexico. Mexico is a significant source, transit, and destination for human trafficking. Victims are trafficked within the country and across its borders, often into the U.S., for forced labor and sex trafficking. The powerful drug cartels are often involved in human trafficking operations. Mexico's long-standing struggle with drug cartels has intersected dangerously with human trafficking. Some law enforcement officials have been found complicit in trafficking efforts, often receiving payments from cartels to look the other way or actively participate in the networks. Reports have surfaced of police officers working alongside traffickers, showcasing a troubling nexus of crime and governance that leaves victims vulnerable and without recourse. 7. Russia. Russia has a significant problem with trafficking for forced labor and sex, particularly from countries of the former Soviet Union. The vast size of the country and weak law enforcement in some regions contribute to the challenge. The country's large migrant worker population is particularly vulnerable to exploitation, as they often lack legal protections and are unable to access social services. In addition, Russia's geographical location makes it a transit country for trafficking networks operating in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. 8. Vietnam. Victims from Vietnam are trafficked for both forced labor and sex work. The country shares borders with China, which is a significant destination for Vietnamese trafficking victims, particularly for forced marriage and labor. Victims of human trafficking in Vietnam often endure unspeakable horrors, including physical and sexual abuse, forced labor, and psychological manipulation. Many are forced into industries such as prostitution, construction, or agriculture, where they work long hours for little to no pay. The trauma and stigma associated with being a trafficking victim can have long-lasting effects on their mental and physical well-being. 9. Brazil. Brazil is a source, transit, and destination country for human trafficking. The country has a vast network of organized crime groups involved in the trafficking of women and children for sex and labor. The country's large tourism industry and its role as a transit country for human trafficking networks contribute to the prevalence of this crime. Poverty, inequality, and social marginalization also play a role in driving individuals into trafficking situations in Brazil. 10. Bangladesh. Bangladesh is a source country for men, women, and children trafficked for forced labor and sex. Many are exploited in the Middle East, particularly in the Gulf countries. Bangladesh is a source, transit, and destination country for human trafficking. Vulnerable populations, including women and children, are often targeted. Economic hardship, lack of education, and social inequality create fertile ground for traffickers. Poverty is a significant driver of trafficking in Bangladesh. Families struggling to survive may unknowingly sell their children or accept offers that seem too good to be true. This desperation makes them easy targets for traffickers. Bangladesh has laws against trafficking, however, enforcement remains weak. Corruption within law enforcement agencies often hinders efforts to combat this crime. Victims frequently face stigma and lack support from society. 11. Ukraine. Ukraine has one of the highest rates of human trafficking in Europe, with women and children often trafficked to other parts of Europe for sexual exploitation. The ongoing conflict with Russia has exacerbated the issue. In Ukraine, this issue has reached alarming levels, especially since the onset of conflict in 2014 and the recent escalation in 2022. Vulnerable populations are at an increased risk, making it crucial to understand the dynamics of this crisis. Ukraine's geopolitical instability has created a perfect storm for human trafficking. Displacement due to war has left many individuals without support or resources. As families flee their homes, traffickers exploit their desperation. Traffickers operate through deceit and manipulation. They prey on those who are most vulnerable, people with limited economic means or those displaced by conflict. These criminals use social media and online platforms to advertise fake job opportunities, drawing victims into their web. 12. Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan is a source country for forced labor and sex trafficking, with government-compelled labor being a significant issue during the cotton harvest. The Uzbek government has made strides in addressing human trafficking. Recent reforms aim to strengthen legal frameworks and improve victim support services. However, much work remains. Non-governmental organizations play a crucial role in combating trafficking. They provide resources, raise awareness, and support victims. Collaboration with international bodies enhances these efforts. 13. Haiti. Haiti has a high prevalence of child trafficking for domestic servitude, forced labor, and sex trafficking. The country's weak economy and natural disasters, like the 2010 earthquake, have increased vulnerability. One of the main factors contributing to the prevalence of human trafficking in Haiti is corruption. Many government officials, law enforcement officers, and other powerful individuals turn a blind eye to trafficking activities or actively engage in them for financial gain. This corruption allows traffickers to operate without fear of being caught or prosecuted, making it difficult to combat this heinous crime effectively. Victims of human trafficking in Haiti suffer physical, emotional, and psychological trauma at the hands of their traffickers. They are stripped of their freedom, dignity, and basic human rights, forced to endure unbearable conditions and mistreatment. Many victims live in constant fear for their lives and the lives of their families, unable to escape the cycle of exploitation and abuse. 14. South Sudan. The ongoing civil war in South Sudan has led to widespread sexual and gender-based violence, with women and children being subjected to forced labor and sexual exploitation. Complicity of corrupt officials in South Sudan often collaborate with traffickers by accepting bribes in exchange for allowing the transportation of victims across borders. This complicity not only enables traffickers to evade detection but also ensures that victims remain under the control of their exploiters. Traffickers in South Sudan take advantage of corrupt legal systems to avoid prosecution and punishment for their crimes. By paying off judges and law enforcement personnel, traffickers can continue their operations without fear of repercussions, further perpetuating the cycle of exploitation. Corruption within government institutions in South Sudan results in a lack of resources dedicated to combating human trafficking. This lack of funding and support hinders efforts to rescue and rehabilitate victims, leaving them vulnerable to continued exploitation. 15. Libya. Due to its strategic location as a transit point for migrants and refugees from Africa and the Middle East, Libya has become a hotbed for human trafficking. Many are sold into forced labor and sex trafficking. Human trafficking in Libya is a multifaceted issue that involves the trafficking of men, women, and children for various purposes, including forced labor, sexual exploitation, and organ harvesting. Vulnerable individuals are often lured into trafficking situations under false pretenses, only to find themselves trapped in a cycle of abuse and exploitation. The corrupt networks that facilitate human trafficking in Libya operate with impunity, preying on the most vulnerable members of society. They exploit poverty, lack of education, and political instability to ensnare their victims and profit from their suffering. These networks are deeply entrenched in the fabric of Libyan society, making it difficult to eradicate the scourge of human trafficking. 16. Iran. Iran is a source, transit, and destination country for men, women, and children subjected to forced labor and sex trafficking. The government's complicity in some forms of trafficking, such as the forced return of refugees, complicates efforts to combat the issue. There are several factors that contribute to the prevalence of human trafficking in Iran. Poverty, lack of economic opportunities, political instability, and social discrimination all play a role in making individuals susceptible to trafficking. Additionally, Iran's proximity to conflict zones and its porous borders makes it easier for traffickers to transport victims across borders undetected. 17. North Korea. North Korea is notorious for its state-sponsored human trafficking. Citizens are forcibly sent abroad to work in conditions akin to modern slavery to generate revenue for the regime. In North Korea, the lack of economic opportunities makes people desperate. When basic needs aren't met, the risky decision to leave home becomes more appealing. Some people actually cross the border into China, believing they can build a better life. But once there, they face tremendous dangers. Many are sold into forced labor or sexual exploitation. North Korea's strict regime plays a huge part in human trafficking. The government often overlooks or even colludes with traffickers, turning a blind eye to the suffering of its own citizens. It's like a game of chess where the lives of the pawns don't matter. With totalitarian control over information and movement, citizens are left with few safe options. 18. Myanmar, Burma. Myanmar, nestled between China, Thailand, and India, faces many challenges, including political instability and poverty. These factors create a breeding ground for human trafficking. Victims often come from rural areas where opportunities are scarce. The promise of jobs in cities or neighboring countries lures many into dangerous situations. Imagine being promised a better life, only to find yourself trapped in a nightmare. Myanmar's ethnic and religious conflicts have resulted in the trafficking of Rohingya and other minorities for forced labor and sex. The country is also a source of labor for other countries in Southeast Asia. The response from the Myanmar government has been inconsistent. There have been attempts to address human trafficking, such as new laws and partnerships with international organizations. However, corruption and lack of resources often hinder effective action. The commitment to combat this issue must be stronger and more unified. 19. United Arab Emirates, UAE. The UAE is a destination country for men, women, and children trafficked for forced labor and sex. The kafala system, which ties migrant workers to their employers, contributes to labor exploitation. Countries like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, known for their opulence, unfortunately are also notorious for their treatment of migrant workers. Domestic servants and construction workers, often from South Asia and Africa, are frequently subjected to forced labor and abuse, with their passports confiscated and wages withheld. The kafala system, which binds workers to their employers, is a modern form of slavery that contributes to the trafficking crisis. 20. The United States. Despite its status as a developed nation, the U.S. has a significant problem with human trafficking, primarily for sex trafficking, with many victims being U.S. citizens. It is also a destination for foreign nationals who are trafficked for forced labor. In the U.S., cases have emerged where Border Patrol agents were involved in smuggling activities, taking bribes to facilitate the transport of individuals unlawfully across the border. These officials exploited their positions, demonstrating how corruption at any level can contribute to the perpetuation of human trafficking networks. In conclusion, the countries with the highest rates of human trafficking share common characteristics, including high levels of poverty, corruption, and inequality. Each of these countries faces unique challenges in combating human trafficking, which often involves complex factors such as poverty, lack of education, corruption, and political instability. Governments, NGOs, and international organizations are working together to address the root causes, protect victims, prosecute traffickers, and raise awareness about this global issue. Thank you for watching. If you are interested in this content, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and click the notification bell.